Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first ever episode of Moley and Mascy. And I'm Mascy, I'm Steve Mascord, and it's the first video episode, right? It's the first video episode. It's also the first episode to appear on Moley's YouTube channel, but we have done one audio episode. So if you go down to the comments, description, and you can listen to the audio episode we did last week. But welcoming him to his own channel, first video episode of Moley and Mascy, it's Moley, Tony Adams. How are you, Tony?
Doing well, Steve. And I guess we should tell those who don't know, this is truly a global show. You're sitting in the heart of London and I'm on the northern beaches of Sydney. It's about 10 o'clock at night here, quite chilly. How are things over there?
Yeah, not too bad. It's a bit overcast. We've got a niece is staying at the moment, Tony, so I had to wait for them to go out. And anyone who's watching who's got teenage kids, I don't know how you ever get into your own bathroom. It's very hard. I had to run across the road to go to the loo.
Too much information.
Too much information. So, Tony, we're going to remind everybody to subscribe to this channel. It's new and we need your support. Also, want to thank a viewer, Phil Rogers. He watched us on Twitter last week and immediately became a patron. So that's awesome. At the moment, the place you can support us on Patreon.com/White Fever. We might get one specially for this show a bit later. But Tony, 24-10 New South Wales over Queensland in Origin yesterday. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it was a must-win game for the Blues, wasn't it? They've lost 3 series out of 4. To be clean swept would have been the final humiliation. I thought the changes were good. I went on record before the game, unlike some people, and said Bradman Best was a great inclusion. Cody Walker, I wasn't quite so sure about, but, I had Cody as man of the match. I did player ratings as in the old Rugby League Week style, and I gave Cody a 9 and Bradman Best an 8.5. I think it's really in the outside backs, thanks to Cody Walker, that the Blues won the game. The forwards were, as you'd expect, a battle in the trenches. I didn't think there were any great standouts there, but it was in the back line where the Blues won it. Remember that great try also by Josh Addo-Carr, who more than justified his recall after being brushed last year.
Now, we'll pick up a couple of threads from our previous couple of shows. And one thing which attracted a lot of interest, Tony, on social media was your own predictions about Brad Fittler's future as coach. Do we know any more after the match?
Well, no, it's early days. As I said when we last spoke about it, the next Origin is about 11 months away. So the New South Wales Rugby League is in no hurry to make a decision. But I can tell you that last night's, was a dead rubber, but it does have a bearing on things. They managed to just about fill Accor Stadium, the fans, 70, 80,000 of them, most of them went home happy. All the Blues fans thought, how good's this? We've won a game. So, there's a feel-good vibe in New South Wales. And the other thing about Brad Fittler, he's a lovable larrikin. I think, even his critics will admit he's good for the game. I actually had a long chat with his wife today. She rang out of the blue just for a chat and just to tell me about the pressure he'd been under all year and how he just goes out to all these far-flung places in the country, running around with kids, doing clinics. And she said, well, would any other New South Wales coach do that? And my answer was probably no, because Freddie's just that sort of person. He genuinely loves rugby league. He loves the public. The people love him. So even though he has lost 3 out of 4 series, it would be a big call to sack him. And I think all this will come into play when David Trodden and the New South Wales Rugby League hierarchy sit down, probably around Christmas time, to decide what their next move is.
Now, before I move on to the next point too, Tony, we normally read through some Patreon supporters, but I haven't got the list in front of me, so I'll have a look in the description for the Patreon supporters, but we'll be better prepared next week, and I will read through them. The second thread that I wanted to bring up is, moving on from that, is the RLPA action with no interviews. And, I would have personally, being old school, I would have liked to have heard from Bradman Best. I would have liked to have learned, who he most credits for getting him there. Whether when he was backing up James Tedesco's break, whether he shouted anything, what he thought about having a try disallowed, how that affected his confidence, what was said to him at full time, how many messages he had on his phone when he turned it on. I would have liked to have heard all that, but I understand why we didn't, and I'm not blowing up. I'm not joining to sort of pile on to the RLPA that they've spoiled everything. But nevertheless, they're the things that interest me from watching footy from the 80s, since the 80s. I don't know about you, Tony, but I felt if they were trying to deny something, then they did. They did deny something. Unfortunately, they also denied Bradman Best what I would call a page in his scrapbook. I know these days people don't actually physically cut things out, but right alongside the photo of him scoring a try, and I guess now it's a digital thing or it's a memory, there's headlines about things he said and stuff he said at full time that he'll never say again because no one was there to ask him. So it is possible to have those two views. They're not mutually exclusive. You can say you missed hearing from the player at full time and still say that this is why we missed out, and that's fair enough.
Yeah, all good points. But what I did enjoy when you mentioned Bradman Best is hearing from his mum and dad, and his mum was just about in tears, as you'd expect. His dad was very emotional. We also got to hear from Billy Slater's wife about just what it meant to her winning the series, and of course what it meant to Billy. So we sort of got to see a different side of things. Channel 9 got a bit creative, and they obviously decided, well, we can't talk to the players. We'll talk to their loved ones, and there were some good emotional quotes, and it was better than one game at a time. And yeah, we got a clean sweep, and we would have liked a clean sweep. Players do tend to talk in cliches, as you well know, whereas the parents, it's very off the cuff, very raw, and I found that quite entertaining.
Yeah, I think people have forgotten, what it used to be like and how an interview can be with follow-up questions. I mean, that's the thing. You ask follow-up questions and you find things out. You ask one question and you get a cliche. And it's almost like it's not, I don't know if it's a lost art, but it's certainly a forgotten art as far as the viewers and readers are concerned. They think that players at full time is just cliches and that's all it is, and they don't miss it at all. What I was going to say to you, Tony, is do you have any mail as to how long this continues? Is everything back to normal this weekend?
I'm really not sure, Steve. I think the RLPA is playing it by ear in the hope that they'll pressure the NRL into sitting down at the table again and having talks and having their demands met. I think they're tired of being labelled a toothless tiger, which they have been for the last 20, 30 years. The Players Association was always considered a bit of a joke, and this is the strongest stance I can certainly remember by them. I'm sure you're the same. So Clint Newton, he's sticking to his guns, and it'll be interesting to see exactly what the next move is.
I think boycotting the Dally M's was a step up from this, really. So I guess that was even more militant, if you want to use that word. It's not really.
Yeah, that's true. That was a big one. That certainly hurt the NRL because that was their gala night. So
we all went to Fox Studios and had the Keithy C's named after Keith Cole. Didn't miss anything. Killed the same number of brain cells. Just didn't have to rent a dinner suit. So it was pretty good all around. Tony, you've put the call out for questions from your readers. What have you got for us, Tony? I knew you'd have to put those glasses on eventually.
Yeah, it's called getting old, Steve.
What I do is I just don't. If I'm not going to have to read anything, I don't have them on at all. And if I know I'm going to have to, I put them on to start. Anyway, right. What have you got?
Well, the first one's from a good fellow, the rugby league shadow. He's a fanatical rugby league man, and he's asked a very good question, probably the question most people are asking around about now. Where do you see the next NRL team being located, and when do you think is the right time frame for their introduction? So you go first on this one, Steve.
Well, where I see it, generally speaking, there's two answers. Like, I may not agree with where I see it. I may not agree with my answer to either, but I think there, from what we've heard from the negotiations with the RLPA, they are looking at sort of Brisbane / Papua New Guinea, and they're looking at it in about 3 years. Now, I would go the other way. I'd go Perth, and I'd wait 5 years. But I mean, so you know, what they're planning to do and what they should do are two different things.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. I think if we're going to call ourselves the National Rugby League, we've got to basically get away from the East Coast and go to Perth, where there's definitely a market. I've been over there a couple of times to cover rugby league matches and been quite pleasantly surprised by the number of expats, the number of Kiwis who are all mad rugby league fans who would love their own team. We, of course, had the Western Reds back in the 90s, and they had some success. They certainly got some crowds. I'd be a little more radical than you. I'd bring them in 2 or 3 years, bearing in mind we look at the Dolphins and their stunning success, and they've done it in at what time frame do they have? A couple of years, 3 years?
A couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got to put my hand up. I thought the Dolphins would win 3 to 5 games this year. So to me, they've been the feel-good story of the year. I mean, they're great to watch. They're never dead. You know, they can be 30 points down, and next thing you know, they've made a game of it. They might not necessarily win it, and they've found the going tough the last few weeks. You know, they've found a long season, injuries and suspensions, and Origin have caught up with them, but they're still in there punching, and good luck to them. And I think Wayne Bennett and Christian Wolf have done a marvellous job. And, you know, I think it's fair to say they're just about everyone's second favourite team at the moment.
Next question, Tony.
Now, the next one is from someone called WTF- You Can't Be Seen. Geez, these names are getting even more bizarre. What potentially is the most corruptible rule in our modern game for the ref to throw a game? Well, let me start by saying I don't believe refs throw games. I think refs make terrible mistakes, and I think the bunker makes terrible mistakes, but I certainly don't think they throw it. But if you're looking for something that's very contentious, I would say the ruck rule, the holding down, the wrestle, you could penalise probably 3 tackles out of every 6 for that. Sometimes refs turn a blind eye. They like the game to flow. Other times they crack down on it early in the hope that we'll get a fast, clean game. What's your take on that, Steve?
Refs can't win games, so refs can't throw games. But they get you. I think he means fix a game. And yes. I don't think. Look, I can't think of one instance where I've thought that happened after all these years, and I'm really, really old. But the 6 again is a lottery. I don't know, over here in England, Tony Smith blew up about it at the weekend, saying it ruins a match. But certainly 6 again is really, to me, there's a lot of interpretation. And I'm not sure that, like we had 2 referees for 4 or 5 years, we might have 6 again for 4 or 5 years, and then I reckon it'll go away again.
Right. Now we've got Skinny Bob wants to know who's going to play in the big dance on grand final day, and do you rate my Eels? You take this one first, Steve.
I think I'm going to tip the Warriors to make the grand final, and their opponents. Souths have sort of started to fall away, haven't they? Maybe we'll have it all out of New South Wales grand final again. I think maybe only the 2nd or 3rd time we've had that. And I'm tipping the Broncos and the Warriors. How about that one?
Geez, that'd upset a few people in Sydney, wouldn't it? But mate, I take the opposite approach to you as far as Souths. Having watched Cody Walker just ripped Queensland the shreds out wide last night, and also Cam Murray and Big Keon in the back row. He was outstanding. I'm starting to get a new respect for South. They've been a bit up and down, but I reckon South and Penrith, I just can't go past Penrith. Ivan Cleary, who coincidentally was sitting in the New South Wales coaches box, he seems to have the Midas touch at the moment. I think Souths and Penrith and Skinny Bob, your Eels, maybe third or fourth. The next one's from Joe Davola. This is a real name, Steve. Although he goes by the alias of Norberg, so maybe I shouldn't have given that away. And he's asked a very good question. Is Anthony Seibold digging his own grave at Manly with these Isaac Moses signings? I'll kick off this one. It's a real problem in the game when managers get a hold of a coach and start sending his players there. We've seen it Manly, Aaron Woods, who's getting near the end of his career. Lovely fellow, Aaron, but he sent him there and he's getting regular first grade. He sent Cooper Johns there, a fringe first grader. And I think he's planning to send a few more there. So, yeah, managers can have a bit of a hold on coaches and teams. Is that how you see it, Steve?
Yeah, I don't really know enough. Is Anthony Seibold also managed by Isaac Moses? Or
yes, he is.
That's, right. Yeah.
That's
I don't know, but I guess you would hope someone at the club, if you're a stakeholder at Manly, like a fan, for instance, that the club would have the same question, and the club would be asking Anthony those questions too. So that's all you can really hope, is that we're not the only ones talking about this. It's being talked about internally.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Darren Jones is asking another question that's very topical. Are the Tigers going to survive with the current board, CEO and chairman? We seem doomed. You start that one, Steve.
They're going to survive because they get a cut of TV money. The NRL you don't have promotion and relegation in the NRL. So, they get their cut of the TV money, and that pays their bills and keeps opening the doors every day. And whether they, are successful on the field, that's another matter. But as businesses, you're not going to go broke because they're losing. That isn't the way it works in Australia or in the NRL.
Yeah, that's true. I think what Darren was more getting at is, are they going to be competitive? I think that's what he means. And things aren't looking great. They're still missing out on players. They're after. They're chasing Brodie Croft at the moment, who they think might be the answer to their halfback woes. I know he's been killing it over there in Super League, but whether they can lure him or not, we all know that.
A very long-term contract, Tony. He signed like a 7-year contract.
Yeah, he does have a 7-year deal, but I'm pretty sure at the end of every year, he's got 7 get-out clauses. So, and that's the way it works with most NRL guys, that when they go over there and sign a long-term deal, they invariably have a get-out clause for just an occasion like this. He's done a couple of years. He's improved his game, his confidence. We saw Jackson Hastings do the same. We've seen a couple of other guys do the same. We've seen Jack Cogger, for instance. He's been playing really well at Penrith after a couple of years over in England. So, Brodie Croft. But basically things are untenable at the Tigers at the moment. The coaches, Benji Marshall and Tim Sheens, aren't on the same page as the CEO and chairman. Someone's got to go, and I guess it just remains to be seen who that is. Now, Steve, Matthew Oliver's asked a very good question. If an Australian team was picked at the moment, who would be number 7? He says, I feel Cleary is a great club player, but really hasn't stamped his authority in rep football and went missing in the World Cup. If it wasn't for Munster and Grant, we may well have lost. It's a fair point. Who do you reckon will be Australia's halfback if we picked a team at the moment?
Well, it's tied to how we start the show, isn't it? With the CBA, because that's why we haven't heard any internationals at the end of the year, because there's a debate over how they are funded, and it's part of the sort of tete-a-tete between the NRL and the RLPA. So I certainly hope we do see Australia playing this year. Someone called the Australian team a museum piece on social media this week, and it, not far off the. Son, I remember when they used to pick an Australian team and they used to play games. It was way back. I remember when they went to England and they actually played England instead of last year when they came over here and didn't go anywhere near playing England. So, but I think Nathan Cleary is one of the best players in the world. It would be a big call to the best 4 or 5 players in the world. So it'd be a huge call to leave him out of an Australian team. I'd be putting him.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and the guys who played Origin, that was their chance to, I guess, impress for their what do we call it, the Fantasy Australia team, and neither of them really grabbed a spot in Cleary's absence. So I think when he's back from his hamstring injury, which could even be this weekend, I think Nathan Cleary will re-establish himself. And after a bit of a break, I think he's set for a big final series. And that's one of the reasons why I tipped the Panthers to go all the way to the grand final. Now, see, we've got a few more questions, but time is tight. So thanks for sending them in, guys, and we'll get to them next week, I promise.
I'm the one who's got to edit this. So, the other thing I want to remind everyone is that next week's show, Tony will be back. I think we're going to do it on Wednesday mornings with Mountains and Molehills, which is the first video on this channel. Please go back and have a look at it. We'll answer some of those leftover questions during Mountains and Molehills. This show next week flops back to my channel, right? So hopefully it's not too confusing. There's just 2 channels. It's not 1,000. And my channels is White Line Fever TV. So before you stop watching this week's program, make sure you subscribe over at White Line Fever TV. Now, we've had a couple of results in some underage interstate games, Tony, which we should record. Queensland under-19s in the women, 2014 over New South Wales. And in the men, it was New South Wales getting a win 32-14 in the under-19s. Now, Tony, we're sort of going to move on from last week where we just did NRL tips with both of us. I'm going to get your NRL tips and you're going to get my Super League tips, obviously leaving out Thursday night because this program will be posted after Thursday night Super League match. So, Tony, you ready?
Yeah, ready to go.
Newcastle and West Tigers.
Yeah, I like the Knights here. They're very short priced as you'd expect. The line's about 11.5, but with Bradman Best on a high, I'm assuming he's playing. I think the Knights will just be too strong for the poor Tigers, who just can't take a trick at the moment.
Canterbury and Brisbane on Saturday.
Yeah, the Bulldogs have been a little bit up and down. They got thumped the other week, then they came back and won last week. But the Broncos, even though they'll have players backing up, probably have a couple of players out, an away game for them. But I see the Broncos winning by 10 to 12 points.
And that's exciting, isn't it, if you're a Doggies fan, because the game's back at Belmore. Over at 4 Pines Park, Manly and North Queensland.
Yeah, I see this as one of the games of the round. Manly, of course, vying for a final spot. They're actually on in 10th spot at the moment, just 1 point outside the 8. And the Cowboys have really experienced a bit of a resurgence, and some of their players certainly stood up in Origin. So I'm tipping the Cowboys, another away winner.
Another historic venue, the Sydney Cricket Ground. Sydney Roosters entertaining Melbourne.
Yeah, the Roosters haven't done it for me this year. They're in 13th spot. Admittedly, they're only a win out of the 8. But I see the Roosters missing the 8, and I think this will add to their woes with a win to Melbourne.
And a couple more. Well, it's actually like a full round this week, right?
7 games we got. We're missing one.
Missing one. Yeah. So the Warriors and Cronulla.
Yeah, it's about even money, this one, but this is one of these games I'd favour whoever's at home. So I'm taking the Warriors purely on the home ground advantage. The Sharks will have to travel over there. The Warriors are unaffected by Origin, having a great run under Andrew Webster, and with a full house banging them on, I can see them taking the points here and solidifying their spot in the 8.
And that one's at Mount Smart. This one is at Redcliffe, Dolphin Oval, KO Park, whatever it's called this week. And it's the Dolphins and Penrith.
Yeah, as I said earlier in the show, Steve, I think the Dolphins have really hit the wall, and they're giving away 14 start, and I think they'll need every one of them. I can see the Panthers maybe running away with this, assuming all their Origin players back up. And as I said, clearly some hope of playing. I can see a fairly comfortable Panthers win.
Now, Eels don't have asses, but if they did, these Eels, theirs would be sore from last week. And they are taking on Gold Coast out at CommBank Stadium in our final game of round 20, Tony.
Yeah, and of course they did get thumped last week, but they had 3 big outs to Origin: Mitchell Moses, Campbell Gillard, and Gutherson, and it just showed how valuable those 3 are. They're all back in. I think Fafita's in doubt for the Titans. For me, the Eels at home.
Tony, and your turn. You're going to get some Super League tips off me.
Okay, Steve, now your turn in the hot seat. First game for you is the Giants against Wakefield Trinity.
Yeah, and for the people listening, I'm going to hear from Mark Applegarth after this, just for the people on the audio podcast. But Wakey are on a roll. They beat Wigan last week. I think they continue, and they make Huddersfield are coming off a win against Catalans away. So it's a tough one, but I'm going to go for Wakey.
Fair enough. The next game is my team, Warrington Wolves against Wigan Warriors.
Yeah, it's a big match. I'm actually heading up to Wigan, and I'm going to watch it in a pub with Phil Wilkinson. Actually, I'm not going to go to the game because Phil's he's left the business now. So you can't really go to someone's place, show up at midnight, and crash and leave the next morning. So we're going to watch it together in the pub. Warrington really much improved last weekend. Wigan beaten by Wakey. I can only go on last week's form. I think it's going to be a really tight match, really tight match. But I think Warrington will turn the corner and they'll get up by a point or 2. Right.
Next one, Leeds Rhinos, coached by my good mate Rowan Smith against Hull KR.
Yeah, Hull KR last week beaten in the Derby, however you want to pronounce it. Leeds are kind of, again, they may have turned a bit of a corner now. They seem to be on the improve. A controversial win over Salford last week. I think Leeds. I think Leeds there with Hull KR, as I said, beaten last week in Derby, and things looking up for the Rhinos.
All righty, Hull FC against Cass.
A Yorkshire derby there, Tony, and Cass sort of under pressure now with Wakey getting a couple of wins as far as relegation is concerned. I would say I'm going to go for Hull FC there.
All righty, in the last game, Salford Red Devils against the Lee Leopards.
Yeah, Salford, their fans very upset last week at some refereeing calls. We talked about that earlier in the program about people thinking that referees deliberately fix results, which, as far as I know, does not happen. I can't say it's never happened in a bush league or it never happened in the 60s, but in my experience, I've seen no concrete evidence of it happening. So stop bagging the refs. But I think Salford are struggling a bit at the moment. They're kind of hit a bit of a wall mid-season. So I'm going to tip a Salford defeat in that match.
All righty.
And that's it, guys. Thanks for joining. First Moley and Mascord on this channel. First Moley and Mascord as a video. So we want to please follow this channel. follow White Line Fever TV, share this video if you can. We're just starting. We're up against some big names with expensive equipment. We're the underdogs. So look after us, spread the word. And if you want to support us, it's White Line Fever on Patreon. Tony will be back with mountains and molehills next week with all your weekly scoops. I will be in Italy. You'll be in front of that white wall again.
Exactly. And one thing I want to emphasize, when you said subscribe, someone asked me, what does it cost to subscribe? Well, it's free. So you've got no excuse. Just hit the button and subscribe. And we'll be back next week.
See you, everyone.